You'll know I only say this when I really mean it, but stick around for this whole segment. I chatted with Kaylin Robertson, who's on the ground in Ukraine, gave some really interesting insight about what's going on and actually something hopeful about the struggles that Russia's going through. That was our second conversation, so do stick around for that. But some important context first, which is that Putin did it again. Trump is now using, he should have been using this a very long time ago, some of his more harsh language towards Putin yet. And the latest example of that is what I'll show you here. And then I'll get to what Putin's reaction was to it. Now, none of this matters from Trump until he acts, until he puts into action, which was Zelensky's call to Trump, which is sanctions. Actually put economic pressure on Putin, as opposed to just saying mean words. But what were the mean words? Let's listen.
But that was a war that should have never happened, and a lot of people are dying, and it should end. And I don't know, we get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Do you want to sanction him? Lindsey Graham has a sanctions bill on Russia. Do you want him to move
I'm looking at it, yeah. No, I'm looking. The Senate is passed a very, very tough sanctions bill. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
And you'd sign that?
It's an optional bill. It's totally at my option. They pass it.
Well, he needs to. He absolutely needs to. That will become even more clear again later in this video in my conversation with Kaylin. But then this we've looked at a bunch of times just to fill in the context. Then we'll get to what Putin did, right after this.
President, you want to send more weapons to Ukraine, as you said last night. Last week, the Pentagon paused some shipments of weapons to Ukraine. Did you approve of that pause?
We wanted to put defensive weapons because Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. What did you tell me?
I think that's a question for the Pentagon.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You tell me. I will never get over that. And Kaylin, again, who's on the ground in Ukraine, says he doesn't believe Trump's actually going to follow through when he's saying he's going to unpause the pause that apparently happened without his approval. But we'll just have to see. So then you have this headline from the Daily Beast. Putin unleashes record-breaking attack after Trump complained about his bullshit. We've seen after a couple of their direct phone calls, now you have Trump using this phrase that's more aggressive towards Putin than really he's done, because previously he's been really, really friendly, embarrassingly so, to Putin. And after Putin would look at him or say to him on the phone, yeah, you know, Trump, I definitely want peace too, boom, he would unleash one of the largest strikes. And then the most recent phone call that we covered, they didn't really have a great discussion this time. So it wasn't even Putin pretending anymore, and he just said, no, we're going to eliminate the problem completely. We're going to do what we need to do in Ukraine, was the general summary of what Putin was saying, which left Trump admitting, which you rarely hear him admit, yeah, we made no progress on the call. Before, he would always tout fake progress. He didn't even tout fake progress on this. And then him calling out Putin here led to one of the largest strikes. Vladimir Putin unleashed his largest drone attack on Ukraine to date, hours after Donald Trump vowed to send more aid to Kyiv and accused the Russian president of giving him bullshit. The aerial assault saw 728 drones and 13 missiles launched upon Ukraine. At least one civilian was killed in the attack. This is a telling attack, and it comes precisely, this is from Zelensky, at a time when so many efforts have been made to achieve peace, to establish a ceasefire, and yet only Russia continues to rebuff them all, and then calling for sanctions. Our partners know how to apply pressure in a way that will force Russia to think about ending the war, not launching new strikes. Everyone who wants peace must act. So this is the point in time where we say, you got to do something. You are pitifully allowing Putin to continue playing you if you don't do that. And on that note, here is my check-in with Kaylin Robertson on the ground. And I want to bring in now Kaylin Robertson, journalist on the ground in Ukraine. While we go through this discussion, a reminder to go support his work at Caolan, Caolan Reports on X and YouTube. Kaylin, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me again.
So one of the big news items that I've been talking about a lot is Trump seeming so disconnected from the decisions under him. I don't know if he's lying because he doesn't want to take responsibility for them with his pausing of weapons to Ukraine, or if genuinely the reports indicate that seriously Hegseth and some of his aides just unilaterally, without getting approval from the White House, made that pause that we talked about last time we had a discussion that will be so devastating for Ukraine's ability to defend lives. Trump says he's all about saving lives, and this is the way that you do it. And then he indicated, which I saw some Ukrainian activists expressing hope about, he said he's going to be sending the weapons again. But we haven't actually seen that officially in the policy yet. What was your reaction to that news?
Not much, really. I mean, the weapons package that was blocked the last time we spoke still is blocked. And it looks like Trump might be offering Zelensky 10 Patriot batteries. These are a day's worth of batteries. And I think it's more evidence that Trump really isn't interested in helping Ukraine anymore. And I don't think he's interested in supporting anything that's actually happening to do with the Russia-Ukraine war. I think he genuinely thought that he could stop this in 48 hours. He said in 2 days, all this would be over. And as soon as he started having serious phone calls with Putin, which happened last week, he realized that Putin doesn't want peace, that Putin is only interested in the destruction of Ukraine and the total collapse and capitulation of this country. And that's why he looks frustrated this week, because he's not frustrated that Ukraine is now under serious pressure, or he is now going to have to deal with a serious geopolitical issue. He's upset that his friend that he thought he trusted doesn't actually have his interests at heart the way that he had Putin's interests at heart. And he's upset about it. The way that Trump thinks about Putin is the way that you think about an old college friend. We shared a dorm together. We hung out in the 90s in Moscow. You painted a beautiful picture of me when I was attempted to be assassinated. How could you do this? All I wanted was for you to just leave Ukraine alone so I could give my voters the campaign promise that I set out. And he's slowly realizing that Putin is uninterested in peace. And that's not a surprise to anyone here in Ukraine or Europe. But it's also not that interesting, because now he's just going to wash his hands of this. He's realizing that this isn't just a business deal that he can write off. This isn't just something he can move on from and treat like it's a TV show. It's real life, and he's bored of real life. He's not interested in actual politics and actual negotiations, and I think he's just going to walk away from it. And Ukraine are positioning themselves right now for that situation. They're building their own missiles, building their own drones, and they're making their own decisions regardless of what the Pentagon says. That's why Ukraine didn't tell the Pentagon about Operation Spiderweb, the military operation that happened a few weeks ago, because they're basically ignoring the advice of Trump, because Trump isn't interested in sort of helping Ukraine. And that's kind of where things are going. And that doesn't mean that Ukrainians have given up on Americans, by the way. Americans here are incredible, and they are the best volunteers, and there are many of them. Ukrainians are very good at separating volunteers from Trump and Americans from Trump. And this country is still very patriotic towards the United States and everything that it stands for. They're just a bit sick of Trump.
Yeah, same here. Okay, a lot of thoughts came to my mind while you're talking. Brilliant points. The first is, every time you word it in a very specific way about the friendship piece, it just makes me so humiliated for Trump and for him to be president and stuff, that he probably, to your point, we think, oh, he's so finally maybe realizing he should be outraged about the loss of life and the intentions of Putin. The way you word it is, no, he's just bummed that his buddy let him down. And how naive that is and how disconnected from reality that is so embarrassing and uncomfortable every time I hear it, that for him, it's more of a personal wound. Okay, yes, human life be damned, but he's being insulted because his bestie, who the way he worded it was, we went through so much together on Russia, and Ukraine, and Hunter Biden's laptop, and is in the bathroom. And that really is at the center of his anger, which then sort of informs the next part of this, which is, I guess what you're saying is, you don't see this as a real policy shift from Trump in the direction of being more supportive for Ukraine because he's upset. You see it as more maybe the catalyst for him disconnecting altogether.
Well, he's given up on his friendship, right? This is, again, like, we shared a dorm together. We were best friends. I thought you would have my back. I gave those promises that Ukraine would be over and this war would be over in a few days. And it wasn't. Why aren't you helping me out? And he's just disappointed in it. And you can almost hear it in the way that Trump talks about Putin. right outside the White House gardens when he was interviewed a couple of days ago, he sounded disappointed. Again, not disappointed that Ukraine is being genocided and invaded, but disappointed that his friend didn't pull through. And that's basically what all this comes down to. And Putin is a KGB agent. Putin grew up as an asset to the KGB, and flattery is one of the main tactics of the KGB. And flattery to diplomats and celebrities and could-be politicians is what they do. And that's what worked on Trump. It was flattery. It was the painting to Steve Witkoff. And it was Putin flattering Trump to make him feel important, because that's all Trump cares about. And he feels disappointed because as soon as Trump actually called in a favor, it didn't work. And so he's going to wash his hands of this and he's going to leave it. And he's not going to come here. You know, Biden came here to Kyiv. Boris came here to Kyiv. Macron came here to Kyiv. You know, Trump guaranteed is not going to come to this city because he doesn't care. He's just sad that his friend let him down. And that's not indicative of America. Again, the majority of Americans, I think, love freedom and democracy. Ukraine represents that. And they hate what's happening here. But Trump wants nothing to do with this now that it's gotten too messy. Yeah. So America's now off the table. They're no longer involved in the talks to do with the future of Ukraine, which is going to hit America hard. This country is developing drones at a rate that is unprecedented. Live, real-time data on battlefield situations. You know, if you're buying a million drones and you're a procurement defense company in America and you need real-time battlefield data, you won't get that for about a year before your designs start changing. At that point, you've already made a bunch of your drones, and drones are the future of warfare. This country is now leading the world in technology and defense technology. And America is going to lose out on that if they step back and they no longer want to be part of the negotiations here. And Ukraine is at the front line of that. And America could seriously benefit from helping Ukraine, even in just that shared tech, that shared battlefield technology, and the fact that this country makes 200,000 drones a month. 3 days ago, this country hit that landmark. This day last year, Ukraine was making 20,000 drones a month. Now it's 200,000. That surpasses the United States, not just in drone quality, but drone quantity. And drones are the future of warfare. And the US could really benefit from this. But again, Trump cares more about himself than the needs of the US. Which is super annoying.
The US. Wow. Yeah. So then when hearing news items like that, which is that he's saying that we're going to continue supporting Ukraine, which he did say explicitly. So, I mean, he'll flip-flop all the time, but that's the only, scrap of hope there. If you have a more pessimistic view about him following through on such a claim, then what's sort of the mindset in Ukraine as to their ability to continue the defense that they've held up for so long now with diminished support from the US?
There's a realization that Ukraine's going to have to fight this basically alone or with European allies. And that's kind of how Ukraine has always had to fight. This country was colonized by Russia and the Soviet Union for a century. And when the Soviets occupied this city and occupied this country, they suppressed language, culture, music, eternally recipes, borscht, and recipes that you get in restaurants here were banned. People across this country that I spoke to had recipes hidden in their kitchen cupboards because when the Soviets took over this place, they tried to eradicate culture in this country. So Ukrainians are used to fighting Russia. They've done this for a long time. Their ancestors have done this for a long time. And the realization here on the ground is, we thought we would get help from the US. That would be great. We love the US. We're very patriotic to the US. But it looks like we're going to have to go back to doing what we were doing before, which is defending ourselves with the tools that we have. And that is why Ukraine are using their own long-range missiles that they're developing in the backyard, their own drones that they're making themselves at breakneck speed. 92% of drone technology that is made and put on the front line in this country is created in this country by private companies. And they just realized that they have to do it themselves. The Black Sea Fleet, which is Putin's prized shipyard, right? This is his crown jewel. 50% of it is sunk and turned into coral reefs by this country without a navy. And that was done in 2022 because when Ukrainians realize that they're not going to get support from their friends or their neighbors, they're going to do it themselves. So there's a quiet confidence here. I mean, I've been visiting this country for 2.5 years. Obviously, I live here now, but this is the first time I've actually been here. And I can feel that people are more confident than ever. They're happier than ever because they know that Russia is sliding down the economic scale. Russia's economy is smaller than Italy's right now. They are getting hammered every single night by Ukraine's long-range drone attacks, and they're fighting this war themselves, and they can do it. So it's a different time in this country, and the only thing that Russia really has right now is the image of itself as a world leader. Don't poke the Russian bear. We're aggressive. We've got nukes. Right? This is the kind of stuff that Kim Jong-un puts out. And this is also why Putin and Kim Jong-un are becoming best friends recently. They're the same people, just different haircuts. And
different body types.
That's the case. Yeah, but that's why they're buddying up so much, because Russia is becoming North Korea. And when North Korea threatened to blow up the world with their nuclear weapons, we laugh. Americans laugh. They think it's ridiculous. But we should laugh when Russia threatens to nuke the world, because they're also a rogue, hostile, insane state. And Ukraine has proven itself with things like Kursk, taking Russian territory for 8 months, territory that I went to as well and spoke to Russians in, was deeply humiliating for Putin, deeply humiliating. And all Putin has is the image of himself on the world stage. And it showed that Russia's weaker than we think. And Trump pulling out right now and basically leaving this to the Ukrainians is fine. This country knows where it needs to hit Russia. It knows the language that Russia speaks. Russians don't understand the language of diplomacy. They understand the language of might and violence, and that's the Soviet mindset, and that's what Ukrainians are fighting back with or without the US. So it's a newfound confidence, and it's a really interesting time. This is the most interesting time since 2022 in Ukraine.
Yeah. What's the economic ability with less prominent US support to continue funding the defense of themselves in Ukraine?
Well, NATO's just promised 40 billion, which is unprecedented. That's more than the aid promised in the last 3 years all at once as a package. That's incredible. But it's not just about the amount of money. It's the fact that Ukraine has figured out how to use FPVs, these are the small drones that are used on the front line, at a much cheaper level. You can now have a $400 unit take out a $2 million missile system on the Russian side in seconds. And they're doing it at scale. So money isn't as important as it was before. Manufacturing 200, 3, 4, 500,000 drones a month is now far cheaper than it would have been a few years ago, and takes out billions of dollars of Russian equipment. And so finances are looked at differently now. It's more about strategy. And so the US pulling out US aid, financial aid, actually hasn't had that much of an impact, because it's much cheaper to fight wars now. You can do it with cheap plastic or carbon fiber drones. And they're made in-house. They're made in this country, except for some of the camera systems. So the whole type of warfare has changed. Back in 2022 and 2023, the money that the US was offering this country wasn't a transfer to Zelensky's bank account.
Yeah.
It was giving money to US defense manufacturers to upgrade American weapon systems and give Ukraine their old rubbish, right? It was to give them their old anti-tank mines. When I went to Sumy and the east of this country, I saw American-made anti-tank mines that literally were time-stamped 1941. Actually, there's one right here. I don't know if you want to touch this. This is what the US is actually giving us. This is the kind of stuff that the US is actually giving this country. It's stuff like this. This was an American-made. This was designed to defeat the Nazis in World War II. This is a US-made anti-tank mine holder that was given to Ukraine, right? This was made in 1943 in the States and given to Britain. That's the stuff that America is giving this country. And they're creating jobs by reinvesting money in Ukraine. And that drying up actually negatively affects Americans and probably Trump supporters, because if you support the US military overwhelmingly, you probably support Trump. And if you're worried about USA drying up, you should be worried about American jobs drying up, creating new weapon systems. Does it really affect Ukraine? This country can afford to buy and create their own stuff. And this is also why Zelensky offered in March to buy air defense systems to the tune of $200 million from Trump. And Trump said no, because the money is abundant here. It's just about having physical systems. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting time.
Yeah. Wow. And then last question, some of the coverage, and I'll remind people again, Kaylin reports, it'll be linked in the description below on your channel, that's popping off was about the struggles in Russia. And one of the things that we talked about last time we collabed was that the path to peace is not going to be through this mythical peace deal that Trump was going to get in 24 hours and it's going to be perfect. And the only thing that Putin needed was an agreement that Ukraine won't join in or something, but instead will be through unrest and problems in Russia because of Putin's decision making on this war. What have you been watching and observing that's been going wrong for them there?
Well, look, the Soviet mindset, which has not changed since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, exists today. And that exists to basically further the idea of the motherland in Russia, that is expansionism and colonial conquest, to invade your neighbors and genocide everyone around you. The only way that Russia is going to be stopped is through economic collapse. That's the only avenue to this right now. Because what is paying for Russia's war against Ukraine is Russia's export of cheap Russian gas, which Americans are buying, which Europeans are buying right now. And if that dries up, and that could dry up because there's new sanctions coming in, then Russia can no longer afford to buy North Korean soldiers, which they've just done, to the tune of 30,000, North Korean weapons and Iranian shaheeds. And then this war stops overnight. And this is actually possible. In the last 3 days, we've had massive, unprecedented levels of political unrest in Russia. And in Russia, all that actually matters is the top echelons of society. You know, it functions like a pyramid. And at the top, you have the oligarchs. And the oligarchs are the decision makers and the people at the top of that empire. This is like how the monarchy was in Britain in the 1700s. And when those people get disgruntled, and when those people start to be hit where it hurts in their bank accounts, and they start to flee, that's when serious instability starts to actually erupt in Russian society. So in the last few days, we had one of the richest men in Russia, who made his money in gold, who's a Putin loyalist, try to flee on his private jet to Turkey, was stopped because a court ordered the nationalization of his estate, which basically means we're going to loot all of your money and take it, because war needs cash. The war machine needs cash. We had the governor of Kursk, which is the region about 500 kilometers from here, the area that I went to, that was invaded by Ukraine or liberated by Ukraine, that was basically taken, I don't know if you know about this, because hundreds of millions of dollars was given in 2023 from the Kremlin to the governors of Kursk to fortify that border between Sumy and Kursk. And there's so much corruption and embezzlement in Russia, universally, because it's a mafia state, that by the time those hundreds of millions of dollars reached the Sumy border, it ended up with $50 or $60 local guys digging a couple of holes in the ground, anti-tank trenches. And Russia wants revenge for that. So they're cannibalizing their own. 2 weeks ago, I made a video talking about how Russian soldiers are now eating each other. This shows an absolute disaster of logistics and morale in the Russian army. This hasn't happened in Europe since 1944 at Stalingrad, when the Nazis tried to storm Russia. And now the state is cannibalizing itself by going after its own oligarchs. And the only reason there hasn't been mass protests and riots in Russia is because Putin has been mobilizing his army from rural areas of Russia, from the small towns and the small villages, places that are cut off from the internet where people can't complain when their cemeteries get filled up with conscripts. He hasn't been recruiting from Moscow or St. Petersburg, where his friends are. Now, that war is reaching those cities. You know, Ukraine, this country, fired 550 drones into Russian airspace 4 days ago, and that shut down most of the airports in St. Petersburg. And the people that get flights in Russia are the top 1% of society. Less than a third of Russians even have a passport, right? This is a tiny number of people. Only the top people in that country are getting on planes and flying to the Kremlin, are flying to Moscow and making these decisions. So now the war is reaching the people that matter in Russia, the people that are close to Putin in Russia. And that genuinely is freaking Putin out. That's why Putin is hiding in bunkers right now. A lot of the air defense systems in Russia have been moved from places where they need to be. to protecting Putin, right, around the bubble that he lives in. And that's why he's hiding in bunkers. That's why he can't sit more than 50 feet across the table from anyone right now, because he's terrified, because the cracks are really starting to show. Ukraine are hitting Russia where it matters. And the people that matter in Russia, the people with money, are getting pissed off. It's a different time. We haven't seen anything like this ever happen in Russia, and the newspapers are saying it as well. And in Soviet mentality and in Russia, when the newspapers are saying something, you know it's really bad, because the truth is pretty censored.
Wow. Well, there it is. Thank you so much again. Let people know or remind them where they can support your work and what they should expect to find there.
Well, just type my name in anywhere you want, wherever you get your news, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, just type in Kaylin Reports and you'll find my videos.
Awesome. Thanks. Stay safe.